Tonight's MLB slate isn't just about baseball, it's about beating the books. With underdogs ready to shock, aces set to dominate, and lines the public is sleeping on, this is the kind of board where one smart move can flip your whole night. If you're serious about finding hidden value and turning angles into profit, you're in the right place. The Detroit Tigers open up this series against the Houston Astros in what looks like one of those games where the line feels just a little bit tricky. On the surface, you see Houston, a team with playoff experience, better bats, and the name recognition, matched up against Detroit, who's been inconsistent offensively all season. Naturally, the public leans hard toward Houston. And that's exactly why we need to slow down and look at this number before we run to the window. Oddsmakers don't hand out free money, so when you see Houston listed at a price that feels too good to be true, you have to ask yourself why. Pitching matchup here sets the tone. For the Astros, Hunter Brown is expected to take the mound. He's got electric stuff, but he's been hit or miss all year. One outing he'll go 6 innings with 9 strikeouts and 1 earned run, and the next outing he'll get tagged for 5 runs in 3 innings. His command issues creep up, especially against teams that make pitchers work. Detroit, to their credit, has been improving their plate discipline. They're not a top 5 walk team or anything close, but in the last few weeks, their on-base percentage against right-handed pitching has climbed steadily. That matters against a guy like Brown, who tends to unravel when he falls behind in counts. On the other side, Detroit sends Tarik Skubal. Now, this is where things get interesting. Skubal has been Detroit's ace, and you could argue he's one of the top left-handers in the American League right now. His strikeout-to-walk ratio is elite, and he keeps the ball in the park, which is huge against a lineup like Houston's. The Astros can do damage with the long ball, but they've also been one of the most inconsistent lineups against lefties this season. Jose Altuve and Yordan Alvarez both have good splits against southpaws, but the bottom half of this order drops off significantly. Skubal has shown the ability to carve up weaker bats, and if he can limit the big hits from the top of the lineup, Detroit suddenly becomes very live in this game. Now, let's talk line movement and public action, because that's the bread and butter of this handicap. Early open had Houston as a slight favorite, sitting around -125 on the road. With how the public bets the Astros, you'd expect that number to climb, but instead, it's holding steady, even dropping a few cents in spots. That's what you call reverse line movement, money from respected bettors showing up on Detroit while the public hammers Houston. If you're betting just off logos, you're taking Houston every time. But if you're betting off the market signals, you're leaning Tigers here. The total in this game is set around 8 runs, and that's where I think you can find another angle. With Skubal dealing and Brown being unpredictable, this total looks sharp. If Brown shows up, we're looking at a low-scoring duel. If he doesn't, Detroit can put up a crooked number and Skubal can hold Houston down. Either way, I lean under, but I'd rather target a team total here. Detroit's team total sits at 3.5 in most books, shaded toward the over. Given Brown's volatility, that over is very playable, but it's not a max play. It's the kind of lean you sprinkle one unit on. So let's organize the plays here in unit confidence like I would on a daily card. The strongest look in this game is Detroit moneyline at plus money. It's not a 5-unit bomb, but it's a confident 2 to 3 unit play. The market signals point that way, and with Skubal on the mound, you're getting the better starter at home with the public fading him. The secondary angle is the under 8 runs, but I'm only putting 1 unit there. Too much variance with Brown to go big, but the way Detroit struggles to hit for power and the way Skubal can dominate makes it worth a shot. The third look is that Detroit team total over 3.5, 1 unit again, just to play against Brown's inconsistency. Now, if you want to build a same-game parlay leg for fun, here's how I'd piece it. Tigers moneyline, Tarik Skubal 6+ strikeouts, and under 10.5 alternate total. That gives you a plus money price with a reasonable path. Skubal racks up strikeouts consistently, especially against teams that chase sliders, and Houston has been prone to that lately. Add in the under alternate line to give yourself a cushion in case the total wiggles around. That's not a max confidence play, but for a fun SGP, it's a solid look. Final word on this game: don't get caught up in the Astros name brand. They're not the same juggernaut they were a few years ago, and Detroit has a legit ace on the mound. Oddsmakers shaded this line for a reason, and the sharp money already told you where it's going. Detroit is the side, with Skubal giving them a great chance to take Game 1 at home. Final score prediction: I'll say Tigers 4, Astros 2. Detroit cashes as a live dog, the under sneaks through, and if you played that team total, you sweat out a fourth run late but get it home. That's how I'm seeing this one. Play it smart, stick to your units, don't get greedy, and remember, the value's not in the flashy names, it's in the numbers in the market. The Pittsburgh Pirates and Toronto Blue Jays open their series in Pittsburgh, and this one feels like one of those sneaky spots on the schedule where the public perception doesn't quite match what's happening on the field. Toronto, with the bigger names in their lineup, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Bo Bichette, George Springer, they draw the casual money. But if you've been following the Blue Jays closely this season, you know they've been one of the streakiest, most frustrating teams in the American League. They'll put up 7 runs one night and then go ice cold for 3 games in a row. Meanwhile, Pittsburgh has quietly been more competitive than people give them credit for, especially when playing at PNC Park. Pitching matchup is where this gets interesting. Toronto is set to go with Jose Berrios, and if you've bet on him over the years, you know exactly what you're getting. He's capable of looking like a frontline starter one night, then completely unraveling the next. His season numbers look solid on the surface, ERA in the low 3s, WHIP under 1.2, but if you dig deeper, his road splits aren't nearly as strong. Berrios has always been a pitcher who feeds off comfort at home, and PNC Park is one of those places where he hasn't historically pitched well. The Pirates don't have the deepest offense, but they've shown flashes against right-handed pitching, and Berrios is the kind of guy who gives up the occasional crooked inning if his command is off. For Pittsburgh, they're expected to send Mitch Keller to the mound. He's been the face of their rotation for a couple years now, and while he's not an ace in the mold of Jarrett Cole or Tariq Skubal, Keller is reliable enough to give Pittsburgh a chance. He's cut down on his walks, his strikeout numbers are healthy, and he's been much better at home than on the road. Against Toronto, a team that's been mediocre against right-handed starters, Keller is in a position to keep them in the game. The danger, of course, is the long ball. Toronto's lineup is built on slugging, and if Keller misses up in the zone, Guerrero or Springer can flip the game with one swing. Now let's look at the market. This line opened with Toronto favored around -140 on the road, which is exactly the kind of number that makes you pause. Think about it. Toronto, a team that's been underachieving, laying that kind of juice on the road against a Pirates team with their best starter on the mound. The public will hammer Toronto here, because most casual bettors don't trust Pittsburgh. Yet, instead of climbing toward -150 or -160, this line has held steady and in some shops even ticked down toward -135. That's a red flag for Toronto backers and a green light for anyone looking for value on the Pirates. Reverse line movement is telling you sharp money is landing on Pittsburgh. Totals market also gives us something to chew on. The number is set at 8.5, shaded slightly to the under. With 2 solid starters, the instinct is to go under, but you have to factor in volatility. Berrios on the road and Keller against a slugging team create the potential for runs. Historically, PNC Park leans pitcher-friendly, but in night games during the warmer months, the ball carries more than people expect. I'd be cautious with the full game total and instead look to isolate team totals. Toronto's team total is 4.5 juiced to the under, while Pittsburgh sits at 3.5 shaded to the over. If you're following the sharper side of this market, that Pittsburgh over is the lean, because if they're live to win, they're probably scoring at least 4 runs. Now let's line it up in units. The top play for this game is Pirates moneyline at plus money, 2 units. You've got the sharper side of the market, the better situational pitcher, and home field advantage. That's the value play. Secondary lean is Pirates team total over 3.5 runs, 1 unit. It's not a max confidence bet, but Berríos on the road is always vulnerable to giving up a crooked inning, and the Pirates have been scrappy enough to take advantage. I'd avoid Toronto's side entirely unless you're parlaying, because the number is just inflated. As for the total, if you want action there, I'd lean over 8.5 for a half unit, but it's not strong enough to recommend as a main play. For a same-game parlay angle, here's how I'd build it. Pirates moneyline, Mitch Keller 5+ strikeouts, and alternate total over 7.5. That combination gives you plus money while aligning with the game script we're predicting. If Pittsburgh wins, Keller almost certainly gets you 5 strikeouts, and the overall total covers you in case either pitcher blows up. It's not a max confidence play, but it's a fun way to attack the game. Bottom line, this is one of those classic spots where the public perception doesn't match the actual matchup. Toronto has the names, but they haven't been trustworthy. Pittsburgh is at home, they've got their top starter on the mound, and the market is quietly backing them. Don't overthink it, the value is on the Pirates here. Final score prediction: Pirates 5, Blue Jays 3. Pittsburgh cashes as the home dog, the team total clears, and you walk away fading the public side once again. That's how I'm seeing Game 2. Don't get baited into laying the juice on Toronto just because the roster looks better. The books know the casual money will be there. You win long-term by spotting value and trusting the market signals. Stick to your units, play it smart, and let the numbers work for you. The Miami Marlins take on the St. Louis Cardinals in a matchup that, on paper, probably won't grab the attention of the casual fan, but when you dig into it from a betting perspective, this game has some real edges. You've got two teams that have been inconsistent in completely different ways. Miami started the year struggling to find any kind of rhythm offensively, and their rotation hasn't had the depth it used to. The Cardinals, on the other hand, have been a team that looks good for a week, then completely collapses the next. They're notorious for frustrating bettors. Sometimes they look like a playoff-caliber lineup, and then they follow it up by going 3 straight games where they can't score more than 2 runs. That volatility is the key here, because you can't just trust the logos, you have to dig into matchups, splits, and, most importantly, what the market is telling you. Pitching matchup is the starting point. For Miami, Braxton Garrett is projected to take the ball. He's a lefty who has shown flashes of being solid, but he's not dominant. His biggest issue is command when he falls behind in counts. When Garrett has to throw fastballs in the zone, he gets hit hard. Against right-handed heavy lineups like the Cardinals, that's dangerous. Street Lewis has Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado who still do serious damage against lefties, and they've also got younger bats like Mason Wynn and Jordan Walker who have been improving against southpaws. On paper, this looks like a tough matchup for Garrett. The one saving grace is that Miami's ballpark tends to suppress power, so pitching in Miami is one thing, but now that they're in St. Louis, that safety net isn't there. For the Cardinals, Miles Mikolas gets the nod. He's a guy who doesn't scare anybody with strikeouts, but he throws strikes and forces contact. The problem with Mikolas is when that contact turns into hard contact, he gets shelled. His ERA has hovered in the mid-4s for most of the season, and his FIP suggests he's not pitching much better than that. Miami, though, is one of those lineups that doesn't always take advantage of pitchers like Mikolas. They've been near the bottom of the league in slugging percentage and home runs for most of the season. They can string hits together, but without power, it's hard to put up big numbers. That plays into Mikolas' style. He's more vulnerable to the long ball than to small ball rallies. Now let's move to the betting market. The opening line had the Cardinals as a modest home favorite around -135. That number feels like it's begging you to take Street. Lewis, especially with a lefty on the mound for Miami and the Cardinals having a lineup that matches well against left-handed pitching. The public is already leaning Cardinals heavy here, but the line hasn't shot up the way you'd expect. That's where you need to stop and think. If the books wanted to balance out action, they could easily bump Street. Lewis up to -150 or more steady tells you sharper action is keeping it in check. That's a signal that Miami is getting some respect here. Totals market is another layer to consider. This game opened around 9 runs, which feels a touch high for two pitchers who aren't strikeout guys but also aren't total gas cans. The lean here is that the market expects some runs, especially from the Cardinals. Their team total sits at 4.5 shaded to the under, while Miami is at 3.5 with plus juice on the over. That suggests the books think Street. Lewis is more likely to do the heavy lifting, but they're not overly confident in Miami's ability to scratch across 4 runs. Personally, I'd look toward the Marlins team total over at plus money. Michaelis doesn't miss bats, and even though Miami doesn't slug, they can string together enough hits to push 4 runs across in the right spots. Let's organize this in unit confidence. The strongest look here is the over 9 runs for 2 units. You've got 2 pitchers who pitch to contact and 2 lineups that, while inconsistent, both have paths to scoring in this matchup. Michaelis, low strikeout rate combined with Miami's contact approach is a recipe for base runners, and Garrett against a lineup that feasts on lefties could go bad quickly. The secondary look is Marlins team total over 3.5, 1 unit. It's not a lock by any means, but with Michaelis on the hill, you don't need homers to cash it, just traffic and a couple timely hits. As for a side, I'd take a half-unit shot on Miami moneyline at plus money. This isn't a game you want to go heavy on the side with, but the value is better on the dog, especially with the market keeping Street. Lewis from ballooning up. For a same-game parlay, I'd piece it like this: Cardinals moneyline, both teams to score 3+ runs, and alternate total over 8.5. That way, you're playing into the narrative that both lineups have chances against hittable starters, but you still lean toward Street. Lewis pulling it out late. That's a reasonable path given the bullpens. Street. Lewis has been shaky late, but Miami's bullpen hasn't exactly been reliable either. Final score prediction here: I'll go Cardinals 6, Marlins 5. Both teams put runs on the board, the over cashes, and the game script plays out where the Cardinals' right-handed bats are the difference. Miami competes, but the lack of consistent power costs them in the end. That's how I'm seeing it. This isn't a game to unload on, but it's one where the totals market and team totals offer value. Stick to your units. Don't get sucked into the trap of laying heavy juice on St. Louis, and remember, it's about long-term edges, not one flashy play. The Phillies and Mariners meet in one of the more intriguing interleague games on the schedule, and this is the kind of matchup that always catches the eye of bettors. Philadelphia comes in with one of the most complete rosters in the National League, and they've been a tough out all year. Their offense can explode at any moment. They've got power throughout the lineup, and their starting rotation is top-heavy with legitimate frontline arms. Seattle, on the other hand, has been one of those teams that looks dangerous because of their pitching, but their inconsistency at the plate has held them back. When they get timely hitting, they look like a playoff threat, but when the bats disappear, they can drop games 3-1 or 2-0 even with elite pitching on the mound. That's the identity of this team, and it's the dynamic that makes this game interesting. On the mound for Philadelphia, Zach Wheeler is expected to start. Wheeler has been everything you want from an ace: consistent, durable, and dominant when he's in rhythm. He racks up strikeouts, keeps the ball in the yard, and has the kind of stuff that travels well. Even against a lineup that doesn't strike out a ton, Wheeler can control the game. The biggest thing with Wheeler is that he doesn't beat himself. His walk rate is low, and he forces hitters to earn it. Against Seattle, that's important because the Mariners' lineup is built on chasing mistakes. They're not the most disciplined team at the plate, and when they face a guy like Wheeler who doesn't give in, they struggle to generate offense. For Seattle, Logan Gilbert gets the ball. Gilbert is one of the most underrated young arms in baseball. He's got a great mix of velocity and command, and when he's on, he looks like a legitimate number one starter. His issue has been consistency. There are starts where his fastball command isn't sharp, and when that happens, he leaves pitches in hittable spots. Against a Phillies lineup that has power from both sides of the plate, that's a dangerous game to play. Guys like Bryce Harper and Kyle Schwarber can change the scoreboard with one swing, and Alec Boehm and Trey Turner give Philadelphia depth to extend innings. Gilbert's margin for error is slim here, especially if Wheeler is dealing on the other side. Now let's talk about the line. Philadelphia opened around a -120 road favorite, which might surprise some people. Casual bettors tend to look at Seattle at home with their young arm on the mound and think the Mariners should be favored. But odds makers made Philly the favorite for a reason. Wheeler is that much better than Gilbert, and Philadelphia's lineup is deeper. What's interesting is that the line hasn't moved much despite most of the public tickets coming in on the Phillies. That tells you sharp money is on the Mariners, which is why the number has stayed flat. This is a classic sharp versus public split game. The public loves the Phillies because of Wheeler and the star power in the lineup, while the sharper side is banking on Seattle's pitching keeping this one close. The total sits at 7.5 runs, which is low but makes sense given the pitchers. Books are basically daring you to bet the over, knowing the instinct is to expect runs with Phillies bats. But when you look at the matchup, it makes sense. Wheeler can shut down Seattle's offense, and Gilbert is good enough to limit damage if he's sharp. That doesn't mean the over is dead, though. All it takes is one big inning from Philadelphia, and you're halfway home. Still, the number feels sharp, and totals this low with two strong starters are usually a stay away unless you have a very specific angle. Breaking it down into unit confidence, here's how I'd play it. The strongest bet is Phillies moneyline at -120 for 2 units. You're getting the better pitcher, the better lineup, and the market hasn't pushed this line to where it should be. The value is still on Philadelphia. Secondary lean is Phillies team total over 3.5 runs for 1 unit. If they're going to win this game, they're putting up at least 4 runs against Gilbert and the Mariners bullpen. That's a number they can hit even if it's a lower scoring game overall. As for the full game total, I'd pass, but if you really want action, a half-unit sprinkle on the over 7.5 isn't the worst idea, just because Philadelphia has the firepower to blow it open. For a same-game parlay, here's a way to play it. Phillies moneyline, Zach Wheeler 7+ strikeouts, and Bryce Harper to record a hit. That combination aligns perfectly with the expected game script. Wheeler dominates, Phillies bats do enough, and Harper continues to be a steady contributor in the middle of the lineup. That'll give you plus money without relying on too many variables. Final score prediction here. Phillies 5, Mariners 2. Wheeler controls the game. Philadelphia gets to Gilbert for a couple of big hits, and the Phillies bullpen does enough to close it out. The under is live, but the safer angle is backing the Phillies directly. This is one of those spots where the public and the sharp money are clashing, and while I respect the sharp side on Seattle, I can't pass up the value on the better team with the better pitcher. That's the play. Stick to your units, don't get greedy, and remember, it's not about betting every angle, it's about betting the right one. Phillies are the side here, and they should walk out of Seattle with Game 1. The Washington Nationals travel to Citi Field to take on the New York Mets, and on the surface, this looks like one of those games the books want to suck you into. You've got the Nationals, who are rebuilding and sitting well below .500, facing off with a Mets team that has underachieved all season but still has the bigger payroll, the bigger names, and the public perception of being the better squad. But perception doesn't win you money. And when you dig under the surface, this matchup is a lot more interesting than the line would suggest. The Mets have burned bettors all year, constantly overvalued at home, and this spot against Washington is one of those games where you've got to be careful not to take the bait. Let's start on the pitching side because that's the biggest factor here. The Mets are expected to send out Tyler Megill, and while his numbers don't look horrific at first glance, anyone who's been watching him knows he hasn't been the kind of reliable arm New York hoped he'd become. On the season, Megill is rocking an ERA in the mid-4s, with a whip over 1.40. That means he's constantly putting runners on base, and the Nationals, while not the scariest offense in baseball, are more than capable of taking advantage of that. Washington doesn't have elite power, but they make a ton of contact. Guys like C.J. Abrams and Lane Thomas can turn those free base runners into runs with one swing or even a stolen base. The Nationals thrive off putting pressure on pitchers who lack command, and Megill has been a perfect example of that profile. On the other side, Washington is throwing lefty Mitchell Parker, one of the more intriguing young arms in their rotation. Parker has been a surprise this year. While the Nats' rotation has been shaky, he's given them steady outings, keeping his ERA in the low 4s and showing good strikeout stuff when he's locating. The key with Parker is that he's a lefty facing a Mets lineup that has been incredibly inconsistent against southpaws. Sure, Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso have some pop, but this Mets team has struggled to string together quality at-bats against left-handed pitching all season. The ops numbers dip significantly compared to when they're facing righties, and that's a trend that doesn't just disappear overnight. Parker may not dominate, but he doesn't have to. If he can keep the Mets lineup off balance and limit the damage from Alonso's bat, he's capable of keeping the Nationals in this game deep into the later innings. Now, let's talk bullpens. This is where things get dicey for both teams. The Mets' bullpen has been one of their biggest issues all year, and unless Edwin Diaz is available to lock down the ninth, they've had a revolving door of arms struggling to hold leads. Their era as a bullpen has been sitting near the bottom third of the league, and if this game turns into a battle of middle relief, that's a problem for New York. Washington's bullpen isn't much better statistically, but they've been sneaky decent in certain spots, especially when Hunter Harvey and Kyle Finnegan are rested and available. Those two have been Washington's anchors, and if they're fresh, they can slam the door on the Mets late. Offensively, the Nationals actually have a slight stylistic advantage in this game. Washington doesn't rely on the long ball, which neutralizes one of the Mets' better weapons in Citi Field. The Mets have been built around the idea of hitting home runs, but when they face pitchers who keep the ball in the park, they often go through stretches where they can't generate runs. That's exactly the type of pitcher Parker has been at times. On the flip side, Washington has been playing with house money. They're not in contention, so they've been aggressive on the bases, stealing bags and playing small ball. This aggressive approach is the exact style that can frustrate a Mets team that tends to get complacent. The betting angle here is fascinating because the Mets are going to be lined as a decent-sized favorite, somewhere in the -150 to -170 range, depending on the market. That's the kind of number you simply can't trust this New York team to cover. They're 20-25 as a home favorite this year, which means if you've been blindly betting them at Citi Field, you're down money. The Nationals, meanwhile, have been one of those teams you don't mind taking at plus money because they've been scrappy and profitable in the underdog role. Washington has pulled off several outright wins against bigger market teams, and their record against the run line as a dog has been one of the more surprising moneymakers this season. For props, this is where you can get creative. C.J. Abrams is always worth a look for a stolen base or total bases prop because of how often he puts pressure on pitchers. Against Megill, who struggles holding runners, Abrams could very well swipe a bag. Lane Thomas is another guy who sees the ball well against right-handed pitching, and I'd consider his total bases or even a home run prop as a flyer. On the Mets side, it's tough to back much, but Alonso is the obvious choice for a home run prop. The problem is, the books know that, and you won't get great value. If you want something sneaky, Jeff McNeil's contact ability against lefties could make his hits prop viable, but again, this is a lineup I don't trust in these matchups. When it comes to constructing a same-game parlay, I'd probably build something around Abrams over 1.5 total bases, a Nationals plus 1.5 run line leg, and the under on Medjel strikeouts. Medjel has only hit his strikeout overs in about 40% of his starts this year, and Washington's contact-first lineup makes him a prime candidate to go under again. Pairing that with Washington's ability to hang around should give you a nice plus money ticket. So what's the best bet here? For me, it's Nationals plus 1.5 on the run line. You're likely getting it at a reasonable price, maybe minus 110, and it's the safer way to back Washington in what should be a close game. I wouldn't hate a sprinkle on the Nationals money line either because this Mets team has proven time and again that they can't be trusted in this exact favorite role. But the plus 1.5 feels like the sharpest play, giving you the cushion if this turns into a tight, low-scoring contest. Final score prediction: Nationals 5, Mets 4. Washington scratches out a late run against New York's shaky bullpen, and the Mets once again leave their fans frustrated. From a betting standpoint, you're getting value backing the team that's playing freer, hungrier, and less burdened by expectations, and that's exactly the side you want to be on in a game like this. This matchup between the Boston Red Sox and Baltimore Orioles is one of those games where, at first glance, casual bettors might lean toward the Red Sox simply because of name value, but that's exactly where the trap lies. You need to look deeper than surface-level records and pitching matchups because this game has all the makings of one that could swing in the betting market. Let's start with the obvious. Baltimore has been one of the best teams in baseball all season, while Boston has hovered around the fringes of the playoff picture. Already give us a sense of the motivation level. Baltimore is fighting not just for a postseason berth but for control of the AL East, and every game matters with the Yankees and Rays breathing down their necks. Boston, on the other hand, is trying to cling to relevancy in the wild card race, but they've been inconsistent all season, often beating weaker teams but falling flat against higher-tier competition. That's an important dynamic because Baltimore has taken care of business against divisional opponents this year, while Boston has struggled to string together any consistency. The pitching matchup tonight brings Brian Bello for the Red Sox against Grayson Rodriguez for the Orioles. On paper, this looks somewhat even, but when you break it down, it leans heavily in Baltimore's favor. Bello has the stuff to be a strong starter, but he's been wildly inconsistent. His ERA sits north of 5.00, and he's been getting tagged hard by lineups that hit for power. That's a massive red flag when you're facing Baltimore, a team that's top 5 in runs scored and home runs. Bello's weakness is command, particularly when he falls behind in counts, and the Orioles lineup is built to punish mistakes. Rodriguez, on the other hand, is a young arm that Baltimore is leaning on heavily down the stretch. He's been a bit shaky on the road but very strong at Camden Yards. At home, his strikeout rate ticks up, and he's limited hard contact much better than earlier in the year. Boston's lineup, which can be streaky, might have a tough time getting traction against him. Looking at the bullpens, Baltimore again has the edge. Even without their closer Felix Bautista from last season, this year's bullpen has been surprisingly deep and reliable. They've used arms like Yennier Cano effectively in high-leverage spots, and the Orioles have been near the top of the league in bullpen era. Boston's bullpen, however, is another story. They've blown several games late, and they rank toward the bottom third of MLB in bullpen era and whip. In a game like this, especially one that's expected to be tight early before the offenses take over, the bullpen edge is crucial. Baltimore knows how to finish games, Boston often struggles to hold on. Let's talk about the offenses. Baltimore is balanced top to bottom. Gunnar Henderson is having a breakout season, Adley Rutschman is the steady bat and on-base machine, and guys like Anthony Santander and Ryan Mountcastle provide the thump. Even beyond those names, Baltimore consistently gets contributions from the bottom of the order, which is what makes them dangerous. There are no easy outs. Boston, meanwhile, relies heavily on Rafael Devers and Jarren Duran. Devers has been the one constant, hitting for power and driving in runs, but he doesn't get enough consistent support. Justin Turner has cooled off, Trevor Story hasn't found his form since returning, and their young bats like Tristan Casas and Ceddanne Rafaela are talented but streaky. In terms of depth, Baltimore simply has more weapons to attack you with. Now let's bring in the betting angle, because this is where the Kyle Kerms style really comes into play. When you see a line like this, Baltimore is probably sitting around -150 to -160 at home, and you might think it's a little high for a divisional matchup. But that's where context matters. Baltimore has one of the best home records in baseball, and Boston has been an average road team. You also have to factor in how these teams have performed head-to-head. Baltimore has consistently handled Boston over the past 2 seasons, particularly at Camden Yards, where the Orioles' young roster seems to rise to the occasion. If you're thinking about the total, it's probably set around 9.5, which makes sense with these lineups and the volatility of Bello on the mound. The over might look tempting, but you also need to respect Rodriguez's home splits and Baltimore's bullpen advantage, which could suppress runs in the later innings. Props are where this game gets interesting. Gunnar Henderson for total bases is always live, especially against a pitcher like Bello who gives up a lot of hard contact to lefties. Adley Rutschman is another candidate for an RBI prop because of how often he's hitting with runners on. On the Red Sox side, Rafael Devers is the one bat you'd trust, particularly for extra bases, but outside of him, it's hard to find reliable production against Rodriguez. Strikeout props are also in play. Rodriguez should sit somewhere around 5.5 strikeouts, and I'd lean the over because Boston has been striking out a lot lately, especially in the bottom half of their order. In terms of building out a same-game parlay, the pieces that make sense here would be Orioles' money line, Henderson to record a hit or total bases, and Rodriguez to go over on strikeouts. If you want to get a little riskier, pairing that with the under on Bello strikeouts could bring value, since Baltimore doesn't strike out as much as people think and Bello tends to exit games early when he gets into trouble. For Boston to win this game, they'd need Bello to pitch much better than he has and get some timely hits from the bottom of the order, which feels unlikely against a strong Baltimore bullpen. Final prediction for this one: Orioles take care of business at home. Bello gets chased in the middle innings after giving up a couple of home runs, and Rodriguez keeps Boston's bats in check. The bullpens take over late, and Baltimore pulls away for a comfortable win. I'll call it Orioles 6, Red Sox 3. When you look at Braves versus White Sox, you've got to ask yourself one simple question: how much of this game is about Atlanta's dominance and how much is about Chicago's struggles? Because sometimes in baseball, a matchup is decided not by what the stronger team does right, but by what the weaker team simply can't do. The Braves are still operating like one of the most complete teams in the league, while the White Sox are slogging through a season where they can't figure out if they're rebuilding, retooling, or just wasting time. And that sets the tone for this game, because it's less about whether the Braves can score, and more about whether the White Sox can even keep themselves in position to compete for 9 innings. Let's start with the Braves. Their lineup is still stacked top to bottom, even if a few guys aren't putting up the monster hot at the same time because they have depth, and that's something the White Sox don't have. Ronald Acuna Jr., even in a year that's been quieter than his MVP campaign, is still a threat every single time he steps into the box. Add in guys like Matt Olson, who continues to provide power, and Austin Riley, who can carry stretches of this lineup when he's locked in, and you've got a lineup that forces opposing pitchers to stay locked in every single pitch. And that's where the separation begins, because the White Sox arms don't have the consistency or command to live pitch for pitch against this level of offensive firepower. On the mound for Atlanta, you're most likely looking at Max Fried in this spot, and that's a problem for Chicago. Fried has been one of the more reliable lefties in baseball when healthy. He knows how to mix speeds, keep hitters off balance, and most importantly, eat innings while limiting damage. He doesn't get rattled if someone sneaks on base, and he doesn't fall apart the second a pitch leaks over the plate. Against a White Sox team that has struggled all season with consistency, Fried's command and ability to attack hitters directly in the zone is going to be a huge edge. The White Sox don't draw many walks, they don't grind out at bats, and they don't punish mistakes often enough to really make someone like Fried pay. Now flip it to Chicago's side of the ball. Offensively, it's just bleak. This team struggles with situational hitting, and they've been at or near the bottom of the league in scoring for most of the year. Luis Robert Jr. is really the only guy in that lineup who can consistently make you nervous, but even he's not enough to carry a team. Eloy Jimenez can run into one, but he's been streaky, and beyond that, the bottom half of this lineup is just a black hole. You can't score 2 runs a night and expect to beat teams like Atlanta that are built to put up crooked numbers quickly. And the bigger issue is that the White Sox rarely even put themselves in position to score. Too many strikeouts, not enough traffic on the bases, and when they do get a chance, they're among the worst in the league at converting with runners in scoring position. That is the absolute last formula you want against the Braves. Pitching for Chicago is probably going to be Eric Fedda, and to his credit, he's been one of the lone bright spots on this team. After coming back from Korea, Fedda reinvented himself, improved his pitch mix, and turned into a legitimate rotation arm. He's been one of the best White Sox starters by far this year, and his era and whip show that. But here's the problem. No matter how much Fedda has improved, he still has to face a Braves lineup that punishes mistakes. He can pitch 6 innings of 2-run ball and it still might not be enough, because Chicago's bullpen is unreliable and their offense won't provide run support. Fedda gives them a chance, but it's a slim one, because he has to be near perfect to even keep Chicago competitive into the late innings. Now, let's talk bullpen. Atlanta's bullpen isn't flawless, but they've got arms that can handle high-leverage innings. Raisel Iglesias at the back end gives them stability, and set up guys like Joe Jimenez and A.J. Minter can bridge the gap when Fried exits. The White Sox bullpen, meanwhile, has been a disaster. They've blown leads, they've given up late runs, and they don't have reliable options to trust in big moments. Even if Fedda does his job, the second this game flips to the bullpen, the Braves have an opportunity to bust it wide open. That's the exact type of scenario bettors should pay attention to, because sometimes the starter doesn't lose you the game, the relievers do. From a betting perspective, this game is lined exactly how you'd expect. Atlanta will be a heavy favorite, and rightfully so. The question isn't whether the Braves win, it's how you want to play it. The moneyline is likely inflated to the point where it's not worth touching, so you start to look at run line angles. The Braves minus 1.5 makes sense because the White Sox don't have the bats to keep this within 1 run. You could also look at the Braves team total over, because even if Fedda limits them early, once that bullpen enters, Atlanta's bats should feast. Another angle is the White Sox team total under. With Fried on the mound, a deep bullpen behind him, and Chicago's offensive struggles, it's hard to see them scratching out more than 2 runs unless someone runs into a mistake homer. Player prop-wise, you could look at Matt Olson for total bases or a home run prop. He matches up well against Fedda's pitch mix, especially if Fedda leaves anything middle in. Acuna is always in play for hits plus runs scored, because he's such a table setter and threat on the bases. On the White Sox side, Luis Robert Jr. is the only one worth considering for a total bases play, because if Chicago scores, it's probably coming through him. But again, that's not a high confidence angle, just something to consider if you're building same-game parlays. If you're putting together a parlay, the safest angle is Braves run line paired with Braves team total over. It's correlated. If the Braves cover, they're scoring runs. You could also add Fried over strikeouts if the number is reasonable, because Chicago strikes out often and doesn't extend counts. That's how you create a tight, focused betting approach here, rather than just throwing random legs together. At the end of the day, this game comes down to the same formula we've seen play out with both these teams all season. Atlanta does everything well, and Chicago doesn't. The Braves have the pitching, the lineup, and the bullpen advantage. The White Sox have one decent starter in Feta and one real bat in Robert. That's not enough against a contender. This isn't one of those spots where you overthink it or look for a miracle upset. Sometimes the most obvious play is the right one, and Braves over White Sox is about as straightforward as it gets. My prediction: Braves 6, White Sox 2. When you see Yankees versus Rays on the schedule, you already know the books are going to shade the line toward New York. That's just the way it works. The Yankees are always the public team. If they're at home, the books know money is going to pour in on them regardless of the matchup. So, the first thing you have to do when you look at a game like this is ask yourself, is New York actually the right side, or are we looking at an inflated number? Because the Rays have made a living in the last decade being undervalued. They're the scrappy, analytical club that doesn't have the names the Yankees do, but they churn out wins in bunches when you least expect it. The Rays come in with Ryan Pepiot on the mound. He's not a frontline ace, but he's the kind of pitcher who fits perfectly into Tampa Bay's system. Pepiot has been strong against right-handed hitters this season, holding them to an OPS well below league average. That's important against a Yankees lineup that leans heavily on right-handed power bats like Judge, Stanton, and Torres. Pepiot's changeup has been his weapon. When he commands it, he keeps the ball on the ground and forces hitters to expand the zone. The problem is when he doesn't locate, he leaves that fastball up, and that's when it gets crushed. Against the Yankees, mistakes get punished quickly. So, Pepiot's first trip through the order is going to tell us everything about whether he's dialed in. For New York, it's Nestor Cortes. Now, Cortes has been a bit of an enigma this season. The home-road splits are glaring. At Yankee Stadium, he's been nails. ERA under 3, strikeout-to-walk ratio sitting in a healthy spot, and he's kept the ball in the yard for the most part. But on the road, he's looked like a completely different pitcher. The good news for Yankees fans is this one's in the Bronx. The concern, though, is that Cortes tends to run into trouble with teams that stack right-handed hitters and work counts, and that's exactly what Tampa Bay does. Yandy Diaz, Randy Arozarena, and Isaac Paredes are the types of guys who can grind out at-bats, foul off pitches, and force Cortes into long innings. Once that pitch count climbs, we know the Yankees' bullpen has been used heavily over the past week. That could become a factor late. When these two teams meet, it's always chippy. There's history. The Rays aren't scared of the Yankees, and if anything, they seem to play looser in the Bronx than most clubs. Over the last 3 seasons, Tampa has actually held their own head-to-head, splitting or winning series at Yankee Stadium more often than you'd think. They don't get intimidated by the short porch in right or the crowd. They come in with a game plan. Attack the zone early, put pressure on Yankee pitching, and manufacture runs with timely hitting. It doesn't always look pretty, but it works. Let's talk bats. Aaron Judge is, of course, the key for New York. He's been on another MVP caliber tear, and when he's locked in, he changes the entire dynamic of this lineup. But the issue is outside of Judge, it's been inconsistent. Stanton is always a threat but streaky. Torres has gone cold. Anthony Volpe has been a bright spot with his speed and defense, but he's not the kind of bat that carries an offense. If Tampa can neutralize Judge even a little, this lineup looks a lot less scary. On the other side, the Rays don't have one superstar bat, but they've got 6 or 7 guys who can hurt you on any given night. Paredes has been their best run producer. Diaz is a professional hitter at the top. And Arozarena, even though his numbers have dipped this season, always seems to rise to the moment in big games. Against Cortes, those are the 3 bats to circle. Now, from a betting perspective, this is where it gets interesting. The Yankees at home with Cortes are going to open as favorites, probably in that -150 to -160 range. That's not surprising. The public money always drives that number up. But the value side might actually be Tampa. You're talking about a Rays team that thrives as an underdog. They're one of the few teams that consistently pay off in that role. You'll probably get them around plus 130 or higher, and that's the kind of number that makes you stop and think. Because if Pepiot can give you 5 solid innings and the Rays bullpen does what it usually does, they're right there. In this game, for props, there are a few angles. Judge home run prop is always going to be short, but against Pepiot, it's live if Pepiot leaves one middle in. On the Rays side, I like looking at total bases for Diaz. He hits lefties well, he doesn't strike out a lot, and he's the type of guy who can sneak a double down the line. Another angle is looking at Cortes strikeouts. Books are going to set it around 5.5. That's a tricky number because while Tampa does whiff more than average, they also foul off pitches and extend at bats, which can cap strikeout totals. I'd lean under if the juice isn't too heavy. The total is another conversation. Yankee Stadium totals are always tricky because of the park factor. You've got the short porch in right in the summer heat. If the number is 8.5 or 9, the instinct is to look over. But both of these teams have been in a lot of lower scoring grinders lately. Tampa's bullpen is still elite despite some injuries, and the Yankees rely on their pen to shorten games as well. If Pepiot and Cortes are both sharp, this could be a 4-3 type contest rather than the slugfest people expect. So, where does that leave us? It's about trusting what you've seen. The Yankees at home with Cortes is always appealing, but the value side is the Rays as an underdog. If you're betting this game, it comes down to whether you trust Pepiot not to implode. If he gives Tampa 5 innings of 2-run ball, they're live to steal this one late. If he gives up the long ball early to Judge or Stanton, then you're fighting uphill all night. Personally, I lean toward the Rays to keep it close, maybe even take it outright if you want the plus money. Sprinkle a little on Diaz to record multiple bases, and if you're building a same-game parlay, Judge for a hit paired with Cortes under strikeouts has some logic. Final score prediction: I'll go Rays 5, Yankees 4. Tampa's bullpen holds on late, and the Yankees' bats outside of Judge don't deliver enough. Not a blowout, but the type of tight, frustrating game Yankees fans have seen too often this season. And once again, the Rays remind everyone why they're the most annoying underdog in baseball to play against. Alright, let's dive straight into this matchup between the Kansas City Royals and the Texas Rangers on August 19th. And I'll break it down in the same way Kyle Kerms would: clean, detailed, numbers-driven, and focused on how this game lines up from a betting perspective. We're looking at Royals versus Rangers, a series that already carries a lot of intrigue because these are two offenses that can explode on any given night, but both teams also have pitching staffs that create massive swings depending on who takes the mound. This isn't your typical small market versus big market matchup. It's two teams with a ton of offensive upside, but also a lot of volatility in how they show up game to game. Let's start with Kansas City. The Royals have been one of the biggest surprises in the American League this season, and that's not an exaggeration. They've been winning games not just through power, but also by putting the ball in play, running the bases, and finding ways to manufacture runs. Bobby Witt Jr. has emerged as a legitimate star, leading the charge with elite contact skills, pop, and speed. When he gets on base, he creates chaos. The Royals lineup is deeper than people realize too. Vinny Pasquantino, Salvador Perez, and Michael Garcia have been contributing consistently, which keeps pitchers on their toes. You can't just pitch around Witt Jr. because there are guys behind him who can drive him in. What makes this Royals team different from last season is their offensive balance. They're not relying on 1 or 2 bats, it's production up and down the order. Now here's where things get interesting. The Royals' starting pitching has been surprisingly solid as well, at least from the top of the rotation. Seth Lugo has been a rock and Cole Ragans has been dominant at times. In this matchup, though, we're looking at a spot where Brady Singer is likely to get the ball. Singer is a guy who can either give you 7 strong innings or blow up in the 3rd inning. His sinker-heavy approach is meant to induce ground balls, but when he leaves pitches up in the zone, he gets punished, especially against teams with power. Against Texas, that's dangerous. The Rangers are one of the top slugging teams in baseball, and while they've been streaky, they have plenty of hitters who can take advantage of mistakes. On the other side, the Texas Rangers are defending champions, but this year has been more of a roller coaster. Their offense is still scary, no doubt about it. Corey Seager is back healthy, and when he's in the lineup, the entire team looks different. He's one of the best pure hitters in baseball, and he has protection with guys like Adolis Garcia and Marcus Semien. The issue has been consistency. The Rangers will score 10 runs one night and then get completely shut down the next. It's been hard to trust them game to game because of that inconsistency. Still, at home in Arlington, they tend to put up runs. Globe Life Field has played pretty hitter-friendly this season, and Texas has taken advantage of that with their power bats. Pitching-wise, the Rangers are still trying to piece things together with all the injuries to their rotation. Nathan Eovaldi has been solid, but the back end has been shaky. In this game, Andrew Heaney is expected to get the ball, and that's where I think the matchup gets really intriguing. Heaney is one of those pitchers who looks unhittable when his slider is working, but when he falls behind in counts and has to throw fastballs, he gets absolutely lit up. He's given up a lot of hard contact this season, and against a Royals team that thrives on putting the ball in play, that's a recipe for trouble. Kansas City isn't just swinging for the fences, they're perfectly fine taking singles, doubles, and pressuring. The defense. That's exactly the kind of team that can make Heaney's life miserable if he doesn't have his command early. From a betting perspective, you have to look at the strengths and weaknesses of both teams. The Royals are better at manufacturing runs and putting pressure on pitchers, while the Rangers rely more on the long ball and big innings. When you match up Singer against Heaney, it feels like two pitchers who are prone to inconsistency and blow-ups, which naturally pushes this game toward an overplay. You're not talking about two aces locking in, you're talking about two middle rotation guys who can be hit hard if they don't bring their best stuff. With both teams having offenses capable of big innings, the total is really where my eyes go first. Now, if you're thinking money line, it's tricky. The Rangers have the better roster on paper, they're at home, and when they're hot, they're one of the toughest teams in baseball to beat. But the Royals are that scrappy underdog team that consistently cashes tickets because odds makers and the public still haven't fully adjusted to how good they are. Kansas City has been one of the most profitable teams against the spread this year because they constantly outperform expectations. This could be another one of those spots where you're getting value backing them as a dog, especially since they match up well against a pitcher like Heaney. For props, I'd keep an eye on Bobby Witt Jr. total bases. He's been hitting the ball hard, and with Heaney's tendency to give up extra base hits, Witt is in a prime spot to do damage. Corey Seager on the Rangers side is another guy to watch for a home run or RBI prop. He matches up really well against Singer's sinker because Seager has the ability to drive pitches on the outer half to the opposite field with power. Those two players are the ones I'd target for individual props. If you're building out a same-game parlay, here's how I'd structure it. Start with Bobby Witt Jr. over 1.5 total bases, add Corey Seager to record an RBI, and then tack on the over for the game total. That's the kind of parlay that correlates with the way I see this game playing out. Offense on both sides, big names stepping up, and pitchers giving up runs. When it comes down to picking a side, I think this game stays close. The Royals have been playing with confidence all season, and they've proven they can hang with elite offenses. The Rangers still have that championship pedigree, but they haven't been as trustworthy game to game. I lean toward the Royals as a live underdog play here, especially if the money line price gives us value. Final score prediction, I'd say Kansas City 6, Texas 5. Runs on both sides, plenty of offense, and another statement win for the Royals that keeps proving they're not just a feel-good story, they're a legitimate contender. Alright, let's lock in on this Game 10 matchup between the Minnesota Twins and the Oakland Athletics. You've got two teams heading in completely different directions and the market seems to know it. but the question we've got to answer here is simple. Are the Twins worth laying a premium price tag on the road against an A's team that has been feisty in spots, or is there hidden value in Oakland's ability to hang around in games like this? Let's peel this one apart and get into the full breakdown the way I do. No shortcuts, all angles covered. First thing we've got to talk about is Minnesota's season arc. This team has been one of the most frustrating to figure out in the American League. At times, the pitching staff looks elite, the bats are clicking, and they look like a dark horse postseason threat. Other nights, the offense vanishes, and you're left wondering how a lineup with this much talent can't string together runs. Coming into this one, the Twins are sitting above .500 and firmly in the wild card race. That means every single game like this against a bottom feeder matters more than you think. You can't afford to let Oakland hang around if you're serious about October baseball. That pressure, though, is where odds makers bake in the premium. Minnesota gets priced like a contender here because they have to win. That's where the handicapping challenge comes in. Do you trust them at the price? Now, let's flip to Oakland. Look, the Athletics are not a good team. That's no secret. Their run differential is ugly. Their bullpen has been one of the weakest in baseball, and they don't have the depth to go toe-to-toe with playoff-caliber teams over a full 9 innings. But here's the thing. Oakland has been sneaky profitable in spots this season when catching plus money at home. They play loose, they don't have expectations weighing them down, and when a young arm comes in and keeps hitters off balance for 5 innings, suddenly you've got yourself a live underdog. The problem is consistency. You cannot trust Oakland to bring it game in and game out, but you also can't completely write them off, especially in situations where Minnesota's bats might be sluggish in a pitcher's park. Let's talk about the matchup on the mound. Minnesota has been rolling with a rotation that mixes veterans and breakout arms. Depending on who toes the rubber here, the edge swings dramatically. If it's someone like Pablo Lopez, you're getting strikeout stuff, the ability to navigate through a weak Oakland lineup, and you can trust that he's going to give you a strong 6 innings. If it's a back-end starter, suddenly you're looking at a situation where Oakland's contact-heavy approach could be more annoying than dangerous, but it's enough to chip away and keep things close. On the other side, Oakland's rotation has leaned heavily on guys like J.P. Sears and Paul Blackburn, pitchers who aren't overpowering but who can turn incompetent outings when their command is sharp. The problem is command doesn't always travel from start to start, and when you're up against a lineup with Carlos Correa, Byron Buxton, and Royce Lewis, 1 or 2 mistakes can turn into crooked numbers quickly. Now let's zoom in on the offenses. Minnesota's lineup is talented but streaky. They've got power in the middle of the order and speed sprinkled throughout, but what makes or breaks them is timely hitting. Against subpar pitching staffs like Oakland's, you'd expect them to mash, but the Twins have had plenty of games this season where they leave runners stranded. That's where frustration sets in for bettors backing them as big road favorites. Oakland's lineup, meanwhile, is one of the lightest in baseball. They rank near the bottom in almost every offensive category. But again, you've got to handicap effort and approach. This is a team that works counts, puts the ball in play, and tries to manufacture runs in unconventional ways. Against a strong starter, they're in trouble, but against middle relief or shaky bullpen arms, they can scrape together just enough to cash a dog ticket. Speaking of bullpens, this is where Minnesota has a massive edge. Their relief corps has been above average and can shorten games when they're ahead after 6. Oakland's bullpen, on the other hand, has been a disaster more often than not. They blow saves, give up inherited runners, and turn winnable games into late-inning heartbreak. That makes backing Oakland moneyline dangerous, because even if you handicap them correctly through the first 6 innings, you've got to sweat that bullpen for the final 9 outs. If you're playing Oakland in this spot, you might want to consider a first 5 bet instead of full game. So where does that leave us in terms of betting angles? Laying chalk on the road in baseball is always dangerous, but Minnesota does have the edge in every major category here: starting pitching, lineup depth, bullpen. The key question is whether the price matches the true probability of a win. If we're talking minus 180 or higher, you've got to pause. The better value might come on the run line, where Minnesota winning by multiple runs is more likely given Oakland's bullpen implosions. Another angle could be the total. If Minnesota's starter is elite, the under comes into play, because Oakland isn't scoring much, and the Twins might not need to blow up the scoreboard to win. If it's a back-end arm, though, the over could hit simply because of bullpen volatility. If you're looking for props, Twins hitters like Max Kepler or Royce Lewis have home run potential in this park, and you could look at Oakland hitters for total bases props at plus money if you're fading the Minnesota starter. Strikeout props lean toward the Twins' side. If Pablo Lopez or Joe Ryan is starting, their K numbers could be worth a look against a young Oakland lineup that swings and misses plenty. For parlays, Minnesota money line paired with under 9 could be a way to reduce juice while aligning with the game's script. Final prediction. This feels like a spot where Minnesota takes care of business. Oakland might hang around early, but the bullpen edge for the Twins is too big, and their lineup is too dangerous to stay quiet all game. I'd lean Twins minus 1.5 on the run line and consider a same-game parlay tying it to a strikeout prop on the Minnesota starter. My projected score would be Twins 6, Athletics 2, with Minnesota pulling away late. The Chicago Cubs and Milwaukee Brewers face off in another chapter of their divisional rivalry, and these games always carry an extra layer of intensity because every win or loss shifts the momentum inside the NL Central. This isn't just two teams meeting in August. These are two clubs with very different approaches, very different rosters, and very different expectations, but they're fighting in the same race. The Brewers have consistently been the steady presence in this division, built around pitching, defense, and timely hitting. The Cubs, meanwhile, are still working through a semi-rebuild phase, but they've surprised people at times this season by hanging around and making life difficult for some of the top teams. That creates a fascinating backdrop for a betting angle because perception can sometimes outweigh reality, and that's where you can find value. The Cubs send Javier Assad to the mound, a right-hander who has been quietly effective for them. His ERA sits in the mid-threes, and while he doesn't blow hitters away with strikeouts, he limits hard contact and keeps games competitive. When you watch Assad pitch, you see someone who mixes locations and relies on weak ground balls and pop-ups rather than trying to overpower hitters. He's not flashy, but he's reliable, and in the context of betting, that makes him dangerous because the market often undervalues pitchers who don't fit the strikeout-dominant model. However, one thing to watch is how Assad handles this Brewers lineup the second and third time through the order. His numbers take a slight dip the deeper he goes into games, which suggests Milwaukee might have more success later if they're patient and make him work early. On the other side, Milwaukee sends Tobias Myers to the bump. Myers is an interesting case because he wasn't expected to be a big contributor for this team early in the season, but circumstances and injuries forced him into a larger role, and he's responded better than many expected. He's another guy who doesn't dominate with overpowering stuff, but the Brewers are a team that develops pitchers well and puts them in positions to succeed. Myers has shown he can attack the strike zone and trust the defense behind him, which is exactly what Milwaukee's system is built on. His splits, though, raise a concern. Left-handed hitters have done more damage against him, and the Cubs lineup, while inconsistent, does feature some dangerous lefty bats like Cody Bellinger and Ian Happ who could be a problem. From a lineup perspective, the Cubs are a strange case. One night they'll explode for 8 or 9 runs, stringing together walks, doubles, and home runs, and the next night they'll go ice cold and leave runners stranded all over the place. That kind of inconsistency makes them difficult to trust, but it also creates spots where they might be undervalued. Bellinger has been their most reliable threat in the heart of the order. Dansby Swanson provides some steady defense and occasional pop, and Nico Horner continues to get on base and disrupt with speed. What hurts them, though, is the bottom half of their lineup. Too often, it's a collection of strikeouts and easy outs, which stalls rallies and puts pressure back on the top of the order. Milwaukee, meanwhile, doesn't wow you with star power but has a knack for manufacturing runs in key spots. William Contreras has been excellent behind the plate and with the bat, carrying much of the offensive load. Christian Yelich, while no longer the MVP version of himself, has found ways to contribute, whether it's drawing walks, hitting doubles, or coming through with situational hitting. And then there's the underrated depth of this lineup. Guys like Bryce Terang and Willie Adames might not get the national spotlight, but they grind out at bats and come through in clutch moments. Milwaukee is built to win ugly games, and in divisional matchups, that often becomes the difference. Bullpen depth is another key factor here. The Cubs' relief corps has been a roller coaster this year. Adbert Alzolay has had his moments in the closer role, but he's also blown some big saves that cost Chicago wins. The middle relief has been equally shaky, which creates a layer of volatility if Assad can't go deep into the game. Milwaukee, on the other hand, has one of the more reliable bullpen structures in the National League. Abner Uribe brings velocity and energy, Trevor Megill has been strong in late innings, and even with Devin Williams sidelined earlier this season, the Brewers found ways to cover the ninth effectively. In a tight divisional matchup, you always have to factor in which bullpen you trust more, and the edge here clearly leans Milwaukee. Now let's bring this into a betting perspective. The Brewers at home are a tough out, and their ability to win low-scoring, grind-it-out games makes them a dangerous moneyline pick in this kind of matchup. But with Assad and Myers on the mound, you have two pitchers who aren't necessarily dominant but can limit damage. That points toward a potential under on the total, depending on where the line is set. If the books set this around 8.5, the under deserves a serious look because neither offense is consistent enough to guarantee fireworks, and the bullpens could take control late. For player props, Cody Bellinger total bases might have value considering Myers' struggles with lefties, and William Contreras for an RBI prop could be worth targeting given how he's been the centerpiece of Milwaukee's offense. If you're building a same-game parlay, one angle could be Brewers' moneyline paired with under 9 runs and Contreras to record a hit. That aligns with how Milwaukee wins these games. Tight, low-scoring battles with their best hitters finding a way to do just enough. You could also sprinkle on Assad under strikeouts if the line is set around 4.5 because Milwaukee doesn't strike out at an extreme rate, and Assad isn't a big strikeout guy to begin with. Final score prediction: Brewers 4, Cubs 2. Expect a game that's competitive early, with both pitchers doing enough to keep things close. But once the bullpens come into play, Milwaukee's depth and late-game execution give them the edge. The Cubs might threaten with a late rally, but the Brewers' arms should be able to shut the door at home. This game is one of those matchups where on paper, it looks completely lopsided, but if you've been following MLB this season, you know those are the exact kind of spots where the books hang inflated lines and dare you to take the underdog. Rockies vs. Dodgers in Los Angeles, August baseball, two teams on completely different ends of the spectrum. The Dodgers are cruising, sitting at the top of the National League West, looking like one of the most complete rosters in the league. Meanwhile, Colorado has been dead last in the division for most of the year, fighting just to avoid the embarrassment of a 100-loss season. The casual bettor looks at this game and thinks Dodgers run line, Dodgers team total over, Dodgers everything. But that's where you have to slow down and dissect the matchup, because baseball is weird. Let's start with the pitching. The Dodgers are expected to roll with Bobby Miller, one of their young arms who has shown flashes of real promise but has also been a bit inconsistent. His stuff plays. Fastball can touch upper 90s, and he's got a slider that misses bats. But if you look deeper, he hasn't been nearly as sharp when he faces lineups multiple times through. His ERA sits in the mid-4s, whip over 1.30, and the command has been spotty. At Dodger Stadium, he's had some success, but he also tends to give up the long ball, which is always a risk when you're laying a heavy number. The Rockies counter with Cal Quantrill, a guy who just doesn't scare anyone. He's a pitch-to-contact righty, low strikeout rate, and he's been torched on the road. His ERA away from Coors is north of 5, and his whip creeps close to 1.50. You put that kind of pitcher against this Dodgers lineup, and yeah, the public is going to hammer LA run line. Now, the lineups. The Dodgers are stacked top to bottom, and what makes them especially dangerous is the depth. Betts and Freeman are the stars, but you look past them. Will Smith has been one of the best hitting catchers in baseball. Max Muncy provides power. Teoscar Hernandez has heated up, and even guys like James Outman and Chris Taylor can chip in when needed. This is a team that works counts, forces pitchers into the stretch, and then makes you pay with extra base hits. It's not just power, it's a lineup that can beat you in multiple ways. On the other side, Colorado just doesn't have the firepower. Ryan McMahon is probably their best bat, but he strikes out a ton. Ezequiel Tovar has potential, but he's young and streaky. Nolan Jones is back in the lineup, and he does add some pop, but overall this is a lineup that struggles to score consistently, especially on the road. Away from Coors Field, their ops plummets, and they've been one of the lowest scoring road teams in baseball. The recent form also tells a story. The Dodgers are hot. No surprise there. Over their last 10 games, they've been cashing tickets left and right, winning series, and their bullpen is as sharp as it's been all season. Evan Phillips locking down the ninth, Daniel Hudson and Brusdar Graterol in the middle innings, and even Alex Vesia has been solid from the left side. Colorado, on the other hand, comes into this series losing more often than not, and their bullpen has been brutal. They've got an ERA over 5.50 as a unit, and late-inning collapses are almost expected at this point. When you handicap a game like this, you can't ignore how often the Rockies find ways to lose games late. But here's where the betting angle gets interesting. The line is massive. Dodgers minus 300 or worse on the money line. Rockies plus 240 or higher as the dog. The run line is juiced, probably sitting around Dodgers minus 1.5 at minus 140, maybe even higher depending on the market. Books know they're going to get all the public action on LA, and they shade it accordingly. The trap in these spots is assuming the Dodgers will just roll every single game. That's not how baseball works. Even elite teams lose 60 games a year. Even terrible teams win 60. So you ask yourself, is tonight one of those weird nights where the Rockies steal one? Looking at the numbers, Quantrill's splits against this Dodgers lineup are ugly. Muncy has homered off him, Freeman sees him well, and Betts is the type of hitter who destroys soft-tossing righties. But the thing with Quantrill is, sometimes he gets through 5 innings with only 2 runs allowed just by inducing ground balls and limiting damage. If he can do that, and the Rockies' bullpen doesn't implode right away, Colorado might hang around. But the probability of that happening compared to the Dodgers just lighting him up. That's where the handicapping challenge comes in. Totals-wise, the number is set high, around 9 or 9.5 depending on the book. That makes sense with the Dodgers' offense and the Rockies' pitching. But here's the kicker. Rockies' games away from Coors have leaned under more than people realize. That's because their bats just don't travel, and if they get held to 2 or 3 runs max, you're asking the Dodgers to cover the rest of that total themselves. That's where I lean under the radar. Yes, the Dodgers will score, but do I trust Colorado to do their part? Not really. From a betting perspective, the safest play looks like Dodgers team total over. You're not messing with the moneyline juice, you're not relying on Colorado to contribute, you're simply banking on LA bats doing what they do against a soft starter and bad bullpen. Another angle is Dodgers' first 5-run line, because Quantrill is hittable early and Miller should be good enough to keep the Rockies quiet. If you're looking for props, Freddie Freeman bases or Mookie Betts hits plus runs plus RBs are always in play against this caliber of pitching. Teoscar Hernandez home run prop might have some sneaky value too. Final prediction. Dodgers win this one, probably something like 6-2 or 7-3. Miller isn't dominant, but he's solid enough, and the bats give him support. Colorado might sneak a couple runs in, maybe a solo shot from McMahon or Jones, but it's not enough. The books make you pay for Dodgers tickets, but unless you want to gamble on the big dog stealing one, the best way to attack is through Dodgers offense props and team totals. The Los Angeles Angels are 50-71 and have been nothing short of a disappointment this season. Mike Trout is still sidelined, Anthony Rendon is basically irrelevant at this point, and Shohei Ohtani's absence continues to hang over the franchise like a ghost. This team has been a shell of what they should be, and if you've been betting on them consistently this year, you're likely in the red. They come into this game with one of the worst pitching rotations in the American League, and their bullpen has been torched repeatedly. Opponents are batting .265 against Angels relievers, and late-game meltdowns have become almost a nightly occurrence. On the other side, the Cincinnati Reds sit at 58-65, and while they haven't completely lived up to expectations after last year's exciting playoff push, they're still a more competent ball club than Los Angeles right now. The Reds are in that middle tier of teams, not good enough to be contenders, but not bad enough to be automatic fade material. Their lineup with Elly De La Cruz, Spencer Steer, and Jonathan India provides some explosiveness, and they're averaging 4.4 runs per game. It's inconsistent at times, but this offense has the ability to jump on bad pitching, and that's exactly what they'll see from the Angels tonight. The starting pitching matchup favors Cincinnati. The Reds are expected to roll with Andrew Abbott, who has been decent this year, posting an ERA in the mid-threes while holding opponents to a batting average around .220. Abbott isn't a strikeout machine, but he limits hard contact and works efficiently. Against a watered-down Angels lineup that doesn't scare anyone without Trout or Ohtani, Abbott should be able to navigate 6 innings without much damage. For Los Angeles, they're countering with Griffin Canning, who has been hit or miss all season. Canning's ERA hovers near 5.00, and his road splits are brutal. He gives up a ton of home runs, allowing over 1.5 per 9 innings, and Great American Ballpark is one of the most homer-friendly parks in all of baseball. That's a recipe for disaster when you put him against a team like Cincinnati that can hit the long ball. Now, if you look at the betting market, the Reds opened as slight favorites in the -135 range, and it wouldn't be surprising if this line steamed closer to -150 by first pitch. That's telling you something. Odds makers and sharps know this is a good spot to fade the Angels and back the Reds at home. Cincinnati has a winning record at Great American Ballpark, and their bullpen, while not elite, has been far more stable than Los Angeles. If Abbott can hand over the ball with a lead, Cincinnati's relievers have a decent chance to hold on. Compare that to the Angels' pen, which has blown 25 saves this season, and you immediately see the edge. From a totals perspective, the number is sitting around 9.5, and that's perfectly in line with the park factor. This stadium plays small, the weather is warm in mid-August, and you've got two pitchers who can be vulnerable to power bats. It wouldn't shock me if this game flies over, especially if Canning gets knocked out early. The Angels' bullpen can easily give up 4 or 5 runs on their own. I'd lean over the total here, but the strongest position comes from backing Cincinnati. In terms of player props, you have to look at Elly De La Cruz. He's the kind of guy who can flip a game with one swing or one stolen base. Against a pitcher like Canning, who struggles to hold runners on, Elly could absolutely wreak havoc. I'd also look at Spencer Steer to hit a home run or go over total bases, given his ability to punish mistakes in the strike zone. On the Angels' side, Brandon Drury has been their most consistent bat lately, and if Los Angeles does any damage at all, it likely comes from him. But truthfully, this isn't a lineup you want to trust in betting markets. So, what's the move? The sharp play is Reds' moneyline. It's not about finding a Cinderella underdog here, it's about taking the better team in the better spot. The Reds have the edge in starting pitching, bullpen, lineup depth, and home field advantage. The Angels have nothing to play for, no morale, and no bullpen reliability. When all those factors line up, it's a clear sign to put your money in one direction. If you want to stretch it, Reds run line at plus money is a strong look as well, because if Cincinnati wins, there's a good chance they win by multiple runs. For a same-game parlay leg setup, you could build something around Reds' money line, Elly de la Cruz to score a run, and Abbott over strikeouts at 4.5. That combination makes sense and correlates with the way the game is expected to play out. Final prediction: Reds 7, Angels 4. Cincinnati takes care of business at home. The Angels' bullpen gives up late insurance runs, and bettors who back the Reds cash their tickets. This isn't about getting fancy, it's about recognizing when one team has no fight left and the other still has something to prove. Tonight, that's Cincinnati's edge all the way. This isn't about hype or highlight reels, this is about finding value and figuring out where the edge lies. Arizona heading into Cleveland looks like a solid matchup on paper, but once we dig into the pitching, the lineups, and the betting markets, we're going to see where the cracks are. Let's break it down. First, we start on the mound. The Diamondbacks are giving the ball to Brandon Pfaadt, who has quietly been one of the more frustrating pitchers to bet on all year. He's got the raw stuff, mid-90s heater, wipeout slider, and the ability to generate swings and misses, but his problem has always been consistency. He'll go out one start and look like a future ace, then the next time out he's leaving fastballs middle and getting tagged for 3 or 4 home runs. His season ERA sits in that mid to high 4s range, but the ZERA and FIP numbers suggest he's been slightly better than the surface level stats. The issue is the long ball. Pfaadt has given up north of 20 home runs already, and going into a park like Progressive Field, which plays fair but not overly hitter-friendly, you have to wonder if Cleveland's left-handed bats can take advantage of mistakes. On the other side, Cleveland counters with Triston McKenzie. This is where things get tricky. McKenzie has always been a high-variance arm. When the command is there, he looks dominant. Tall, lanky, deceptive release point, and the fastball-curveball combo can absolutely shut down lineups. But this season has been rough for him, mostly because the command hasn't been sharp. He's issuing too many walks, which inflates pitch counts and puts him in constant traffic situations. His ERA and FIP both sit in the mid-4s, and while the strikeout stuff is still there, he hasn't been putting hitters away like he did in 2022. If he's nibbling and not challenging, Arizona's hitters will make him pay because this lineup has been built to grind out at bats and punish mistakes. Now let's move to the lineups. Arizona's offense has been up and down all season, but they're dangerous in spurts. Corbin Carroll's sophomore slump has been a headline, but he's still a weapon on the bases and can impact the game even when he's not hitting for power. Kettle Marte continues to be the steady force at the top of the order, hitting for average, drawing walks, and hitting extra base knocks. Then you've got Christian Walker in the middle of the order, who has been the true slugger for this team. If McKenzie is living around the edges and walking guys, Walker is the type of bat that can turn a 2-run inning into a crooked number with one swing. Arizona also has some young depth in guys like Gabriel Moreno behind the plate, who's more of a contact-first guy, and Alek Thomas, who can provide some sneaky pop. Cleveland, though, has been one of the more interesting lineups in baseball this year. They don't overwhelm you with power, but they find ways to score runs. Jose Ramirez remains the engine. Switch hitter, power from both sides, great plate discipline, and a knack for coming up big in clutch moments. Steven Kwan continues to be a tough out, spraying line drives and working counts, and Josh Naylor has become the real breakout slugger for this team. Naylor's bat from the left side is a problem for a guy like Pfaadt, who struggles with home runs, particularly against left-handed hitters. If Pfaadt makes mistakes up in the zone, Naylor could easily take him deep. Add in guys like Andres Jimenez and David Fry, and this is a lineup that doesn't give away many at-bats. Now let's look at the bullpens, which could ultimately decide this game. Cleveland's bullpen has been elite all year, led by Emmanuel Clase. He's one of the best closers in baseball, pumping 100 with a nasty slider, and when the Guardians have a lead late, they usually slam the door. The setup crew of Trevor Stephan and Hunter Gaddis has also been reliable, and the numbers back it up. Cleveland has one of the best bullpen eras in the league. Arizona, on the other hand, has been shaky. Kevin Ginkel and Paul Sewald give them a couple of trustworthy arms, but outside of that, it's been hit or miss. The bullpen depth isn't as strong as Cleveland's, and in a close game, that's where I lean Guardians. So where's the betting angle? The line opened pretty tight with Cleveland as a slight favorite, which makes sense. You've got a decent but inconsistent starter in McKenzie facing a volatile pitcher in Pfaadt, so oddsmakers are expecting variance. The total is sitting around 8.5, which feels sharp. Progressive Field isn't a launching pad, but with both starters capable of giving up walks and home runs, you could see some scoring. That being said, the strength of Cleveland's bullpen and the lack of true consistency in Arizona's bats makes me cautious about hammering the over. Instead, I'd look at a first five wager. You're essentially betting on which starter can avoid the big mistake. Arizona's lineup has more power potential, so taking them on the first five moneyline or even first five over might make some sense. But long term, Cleveland's bullpen edge makes them the better side for the full game. Player props could also be interesting here. Walker for a home run prop is worth a look if McKenzie's command isn't sharp. On the Guardians' side, Naylor total bases or an RBI prop makes sense given the matchup with Pfaadt's home run tendencies. For strikeout props, McKenzie could clear his number if Arizona's approach gets passive, but he also could burn bettors with walks. Pfaadt's strikeout line will probably be around 5.5, and that's a tough call because Cleveland doesn't strike out a ton. If I had to build a same-game parlay, I'd go conservative with Guardians' moneyline, Naylor to record a hit, and Walker over 1.5 total bases. That gives you exposure to both lineups but still ties into Cleveland's bullpen advantage. Final score prediction: I'll lean Guardians 5, Diamondbacks 3. McKenzie battles through 5 innings, the bullpen locks it down, and Cleveland gets just enough offense off Pfaadt to control the game late. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to Beyond the Box Score, and turn on notifications so you never miss a winning edge. Drop your best picks in the comments below and let's cash together. Padres vs. Giants, a matchup that always feels like it means more than just a mid-August regular season game. These two teams have been battling for positioning in the NL West, and even if the Dodgers sit on top of the division, both the Padres and Giants know that every single game right now is critical in the wild card chase. So when you handicap this matchup, it's not just about the pitching matchup on paper. It's about who can string together big innings, who's playing sharper baseball in the dog days of summer, and who's set up better for late-game situations. That's exactly what we're going to dig into here. Let's start with San Diego. The Padres have been one of the streakiest teams in baseball all season, capable of looking like a powerhouse one week and then dropping 3 straight to teams under .500 the next. But what's been steady for them has been their starting pitching. Tonight they hand the ball to Dylan Cease, and that's a guy who gives this team a real chance every single time out. His strikeout numbers remain elite, sitting near the top of the league, and while his ERA hovers in that mid-3 range, the underlying metrics show he's been even better than the box score suggests. His slider has been sharp, opponents are hitting under .200 against it, and he's shown the ability to pitch deep into games, which is huge because this Padres bullpen has been shaky at times. San Diego needs Cease to give them 6 or 7 solid innings to hand things over without overexposing the pen. That's going to be a big factor in how this game plays out. Now, on the flip side, San Francisco's offense has been hard to trust this year. They have spurts where the bats come alive, but too often, they go silent. Against a strikeout pitcher like Cease, you worry about whether this lineup has enough guys who can make contact and work counts. The Giants have been leaning heavily on guys like Heliot Ramos and Matt Chapman for power, but they've had to deal with inconsistencies in the rest of the lineup. If Cease is on, San Francisco could struggle to put traffic on the bases, and that's dangerous because they're not a team built to play from behind. They need to score early, force Cease to throw a lot of pitches, and try to get into the Padres' bullpen by the 5th or 6th inning. That's their best path to an upset in this one. As for the Giants' starting pitcher, they're rolling with Logan Webb, their ace. Webb is as steady as they come, and he's been the anchor of this rotation all season. His ground ball rate is elite, one of the best in baseball, which is a perfect counter to a Padres lineup that's built on power with guys like Fernando Tatis Jr., Manny Machado, and Xander Bogaerts. Webb isn't going to overpower hitters with strikeouts, but he's going to induce weak contact and keep the ball in the park, and that's what makes him so tough to beat. The problem, though, is that San Diego's lineup has been heating up recently, especially with Tatis swinging the bat better and Machado showing signs of life. If those guys can stay patient and wait for pitches to drive, they can break through against Webb. So now let's talk about the game flow and betting angle. This has all the makings of a low-scoring, grind-it-out type of game. Both starting pitchers are capable of shutting down lineups, and both managers are going to manage this like a playoff game because of how important these divisional matchups are in the standings. That leads you to look at the under, but you have to be careful with these bullpens. San Diego's bullpen has been up and down all year, and San Francisco's pen has had its share of blown saves as well. So the safer angle might actually be to look at a first 5 under, because you trust Cease and Webb more than you trust what happens once they leave the game. When it comes to side, I lean San Diego here. With Cease on the mound, they've got the better strikeout stuff, and their offense has been producing just a little more consistently than San Francisco's. The Padres also have the type of lineup that, if they can get a mistake pitch, they can hit it out of the park, and that could be the difference in a close game. The Giants, meanwhile, don't really have that same margin for error. They need Webb to be nearly perfect and they need timely hitting, and that's a tough formula to rely on night after night, especially against good pitching. For player props, Cease's strikeout prop is always worth a look. The Giants' strikeout rate isn't crazy high, but against elite stuff, they can chase. I'd also look at Tatis for total bases, as he's been swinging the bat with more authority lately, and if Webb makes a mistake, he's the guy most likely to capitalize. On the Giants' side, maybe a Matt Chapman extra base hit prop makes sense, since if anyone is going to do damage against Cease, it's probably a right-handed power bat who can turn on a fastball. So to sum it up, this game feels like one of those where the starting pitching dominates early, the bullpens make it interesting late, but the Padres just have a little more offensive firepower to pull it out. I'd take San Diego to win a tight one, lean first 5 under, and sprinkle on Cease strikeouts and Tatis total bases as props. Something like a 4-2 Padres win feels about right here.